My name is Jake Sturtevant, and I'm a music teacher at Bonny Eagle High School in Standish, Maine. I'm also a part of the Maine Arts Assessment Initiative's Resource Bank team. This year, I wanted to have a video conversation and dialogue with some students as well as some administrators in my school to see what students know about standards-based education and what things we can do differently as educators and administrators to be able to facilitate dialogue and conversation surrounding that. I wanted this resource to be sort of open-ended so that it might be used in a variety of settings, including professional development as well as classroom situations, to help facilitate some sort of dialogue between students and teachers to be able to, and administrators, to make sure that the student voice is heard, and that the questions that are being raised are valid questions that we need to make sure that we're able to talk about and see how to move forward with the system as well as education in general. So I hope that this video is worthwhile for you to be able to have those discussions with your students, and I look forward to hearing what comes from those discussions. Thanks again.
We're moving into this new system of the standards-based world. So what sort of dialogue would you like us to be able to have as far as listening to the student voice within the context of moving into that world?
I think a big part of the reason why I don't hear good things about it. Kids don't like it, and I think a big part of it is that we don't know really. I mean, I know the music students, a lot of the art students have been introduced to it, and so we kind of know, we have the upper hand, we know a little bit more. But so many people have no idea, and all they know is that instead of getting a 93 because they did really well, they're getting an 80 because it's a 3 and it's meeting, and they don't like that because they're used to seeing the grades that they're used to. And so I think a big part of it just needs to be sitting down and explaining exactly what it is and exactly what we're trying to do and what it's trying to accomplish.
High school is kind of like a starting point, whether we go with standards-based learning or whether we go with grade learning. We're all learning material in general, and I think we're just learning how to learn is really why we're here, I guess. We're getting a start.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted out of high school was to just be prepared for whatever I'm going on to after. So like James said, high school is a very broad thing. Like, depending on whether you're going into the military, going to higher education, going into the workforce, you just need a skill set for whatever you're going to be doing after. And based on the student, they're going to take advantage of high school in a different way. Like, you may take AP courses to get out of college credit and learn the material a little more in depth. You may take more practical things like shop classes. You may be in ROTC. I mean, there's a lot of options in high school, and I think depending on the student and the choices that they make, they can get very prepared for the life after, or they may slack a little bit and not be prepared at all.
I would agree with that. I think what I wanted out of a high school experience was an individualized experience. Not every student learns the same way. And that's kind of part of my reservations about standards, is that there is no standard student. I feel like you need to be your own person, you learn your own way. And I think high school is, like you guys said, it's kind of like a stepping stone to higher education, the workforce, military, and it's kind of what you make of it. You kind of just have to choose your own path, and I felt like with the standards that I was exposed to, I could make my own path, but it depends on the student, really. It depends on what you make of it.
Did you say you could or couldn't?
I could.
You could?
Yeah.
That's not really what it's about. I mean, a transcript does a good job of showing, what you got in the class, but it doesn't necessarily show how you do it. So, I mean, with, like Liz was bringing standards into it, a bunch of different teachers may have different standards set. So if some kid gets, an A in this class and another kid gets an A in the same class with another teacher, they don't always represent the same things. But I think what I'm trying to get out of my transcript is just showing what I, like Liz said, what I did in high school, how well I did, because I can remember back to each of those classes and you know, recall my memory of how well I did in those classes. Think back to how I what the teacher was like, how the students in the class were, and just kind of recall what exactly I did in all of these classes. Whether it
Yeah.
More specifically, what's the difference between an A and a B to you?
an A, I think the person that gets the A is the person that works hardest. It's not always the person that gets everything right. Granted, people who get a lot of things right often do get an A, but I think the people who get an A for effort should be thrown in there as well, because people who do get very low grades sometimes put in a lot of effort, and I think it's a combination of how well you know the material, how well you're able to explain it to others and help others with it, how hard you've worked to get that grade, and how much you've shown your teacher that you've mastered the material.
I think it's also how much you want it too, because you can easily slide on by with B's your whole high school career, and if you're, you know, fairly educated, it's not that hard for you to get B's. But I think you really need to want it to get the A's, and work hard to get the highest grade possible.
Liz mentioned earlier, it's an A in one class might be equivalent to a B or a C in another class, just depending on how the teacher is. It's kind of like, you know, completely different people grading your essays are. Just
Well, I think it should
representative of
depend on the teacher's
Right.
standards,
Like,
not the classes.
If the teacher had been grading that, it would have been,
Students'
you know,
standards.
thorough between every
Right.
grade. It would have been valid for everyone,
Right.
comparable. You can't just compare, oh, this person gave me a 98 and this person got a 70. Well, look at who graded this one versus this one, you know.
Mhm.
It makes a difference.
And do you believe it should be the teacher's standard, or should it be the universal standard?
Universal.
Why?
That's a hard question.
Like, should it, I think what Ms. McGuire is getting at, it shouldn't matter which teacher you have for that course. If it's the same course, everyone should be graded on the same standard. Shouldn't matter which teacher you have.
I think it's hands down easy to say that if you've been here at all, you can pick out the teachers that are harder and the teachers that are easier. And you get that one teacher and you're like, yes, like, it's gonna be good. Or you get the harder teacher and you're like, oh, this is gonna be really hard and a lot of work. And you might work your butt off in that harder teacher's class and not get the same grade as someone else who probably didn't do as much work just because the teacher grades a little easier.
It's definitely hard to find a middle ground, because obviously most of us want to be able to say a 3 should be a 3 for every class, a 4 should be a 4 for every class, but you still want that flexibility if you do get a certain teacher who won't give you the grade that you want, for example, or something like that. So I think that's going to be the issue moving forward with standards, is finding that middle ground, the flexibility, but also the consistency.
And it's not easily damaged. Now, here's one that might hit you. It's a smooth surface with minor bumps or very little or no surface at all. You know, and or on the other end of that is there's holes in the surface, tattered pieces, dangled flaps. So you know how many holes or flaps? And then they've got bumpy strips, very evident. There's somewhat evident. I think.
Yeah, I think on the hands is
Yeah.
where it's supposed to be like smooth and nice, but this is supposed to be a shirt.
Oh,
I
it's a
just
sleeve.
didn't. Yeah,
This
it's
is a
supposed to be
sleeve.
a sleeve.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I think
I
it reads as a sleeve.
Yeah,
Okay,
I didn't want to
so-
go over my actual sleeve, so
Do
I
you
made
think
it bigger than my arm.
Are you going to be some bumpiness of fabric texture, or is it smooth surface with minor bumps, very little or no sense of bump?
I think it's here because of the way I attached
Oh,
some of the
yeah.
fingers, and yeah.
Yeah, there's some. You can. Yeah. And look at that. That's true.
Yeah.
But over, you know, it still works. As you see the hands. The hands are doing their fingers.
What is it that you guys know about this system? What do you know about the standards-based system?
Well, personally, I think the word standard kind of almost explains itself. Hopefully, you know what the word standard is. But I know everyone does. But
No. If you had to explain it to a bunch of people hanging out having coffee at Dunkin' Donuts
Right.
who haven't been in a high school for 10 years, how would you explain it?
standards
Never heard the word.
standards grading, I think, It's setting a bar, and this bar, like we just said, may or may not have to be flexible depending on the type of education, what the kids want from it. But this bar represents what you need to get out of something. So, say in a music course, if you set a standard in a music course, say you should be able to play all 12 major scales. That is the standard, and if you can't reach the standard, it just means you don't know it, and you're not going to say pass the class maybe, because we're trying to get everyone up to this standard, and we're setting this pretty well-defined bar of what needs to be met, what needs to be taken from this course.
How do they know right now, like our students that got A's here, how do they know what they know compared to the next school over in their A's? How do they compare those currently?
I think it's hard since they don't have, since standards might be different for one school than they are for another. I think it's hard to tell what a student did to get an A. I think it's
Compared
just
to a school average.
Yeah.
A's kind of and grades are kind of a broad subject. I know it sounds weird, but
Well, don't they have that number that says the school average, the average student who graduates from Bonny Eagle gets whatever, and they can kind of see how easy it is to get an A at your school? I don't, it's subjective
Pretty
though.
subjective.
So the
Yeah.
information in the school
'cause
profile is what you're thinking
Yeah.
of, that,
Right.
that defines how we calculate grades versus how another school might calculate grades, is in our school profile that's attached to the transcript.
Right.
But it's pretty I think the point is how subjective is that in comparison to even talking GPA.
Right.
When we're talking about how subjective is that, when you look at the top 10% of the graduating class,
Right.
what do you say that everyone in that class, who knows what in that group, who's the smartest kid in that class?
Right.
Or is there a smartest kid in the class, or is it people that are smart in particular topics? Because I think that the valedictorian might have been different if we had as a music as a culminating exam, saying that this is what you have to pass in order to be valedictorian, right? That may have been different.
It's tough. You kind
So
of have to.
what is the culminating piece of information that says who's smart in what, and what is the area of
Right.
information
We're
that's going to be
basically-
important to
we're
be successful
trusting
in your
a piece
future?
of paper, basically.
Oh, we're trusting a system.
Yeah.
That's put on a system that may be flawed. That's very cool.
I really like this concept. The difficulty is for me, I think, in deciding how to decide what level actually meets the standard. So we have all these performance indicators, and in a theater class, and I'm going to use a theater class as the example of my challenge here, I think. A student, some of the expectations are complicated, like an expectation that a student understands, this isn't a specific, I should think of a specific indicator, but I can't pull one out of my head right now, but one that involves really understanding human dynamics and human relationships, so that you can then perform honestly within the context of the relationship. And that's a complicated thing to do. It's not something that you read it in a book and once you understand the concept, then you can do it. Actors practice this their whole lives. It's something that you just keep working at. So for a moment I say, the others come in soon after.
The others come in soon after.
Don't turn to him. Do as you wish then.
Do as you wish then.
Get angry. Woman, I'll not have your suspicion anymore.
Woman, I'll not have your suspicion anymore.
What about art classes and sculpture and stuff like that, where it's not something that you can, you can't have a standard for art, because art is it's such a broad thing. I've seen art sculptures that are just it's a silver oval glued to a wall or something like that, and it's art because of the contrasting colors between the silver and the black wall that it's put on, or stuff like that, where it's really up to the interpretation of the viewer. What about how do you put a standard on that?
I can see that aspect of it. I think the arts and music in general, I think if you convey what you wanted to convey, then you were successful. And relating to music, we often in band, we would, talk about a certain piece, but then we would also write a reflection on it and how it relates to like music and story or something like that. And I think if you're able to kind of verbalize what's going on in your head, what your creative process is, I think that determines your success, not just on your performance, because anybody can say, oh, I didn't like your performance, oh, I really liked your performance. It's opinionated. But if you can kind of convey in your own words what you were trying to express and how you think you expressed it, I think then the teacher should evaluate that and be like, you know what, you made a good connection there, I'm going to give you points for that, stuff like that. So I think it's tough when you get to the arts, but I think it's definitely still doable with the standards, and I've had a good experience with it the past 4 years.
Now, and you were talking about the museum, right?
Yeah.
And you guys are talking about performance too, right? Now, these things are things that happen outside the context of the school area all the time, right? Do you think that there are certain standards or criteria that need to be met for those things to happen in those places, like a performance venue, right? If we go to Merrill Auditorium to watch a performance, or if you go to the Portland Museum of Art to see artwork, do you think there are certain criteria that need to be met to be able to get within the context of those venues, and why?
I know museums have a select board of art critics who will look at the pieces and judge them and interpret them in their own ways, and then they have the final say on whether or not it goes in the museum or it belongs somewhere else.
Do you think it's completely subjective? Do you think it's all about what the critics think is a good piece of artwork?
It's not entirely up to them, but I mean, they're art critics, so they're kind of good at judging art.
So you think that there are certain things that they're looking for?
Yeah.
That might be something that is within all artwork.
Yeah, it's...
The technical stuff is part of it. You have to be able to play your instrument at a certain expected
level.
level.
I think that can be graded. If you can play your instrument, like, you either can or you can't, and I think that's where it's a little different from art, because that marker color on paper might be that person's best thing that they've done.
Well, the thing is that you have the technical part of the instrument, but then you also have the expressive part, which is a whole nother
that's
aspect,
harder.
where you don't just play your piece straight face, just kind of whatever. You have to put some feeling into it, and kind of, you hear certain songs and you feel it. You're like, wow, that musician really moved me. And you can play a piece plenty of different ways by articulating, accenting, all these other components, and you can make a piece with the same melody sound so different just based on your technique and your expression.
I did okay when I played it a little while ago because I got most of the notes. I did play it down tempo, and I didn't really pay attention to dynamics or articulations at all. I just kind of played it the best I could to try to get through it.
So what were some things that you feel like you could work on, and how does the rubric help you, or the standards help you in knowing what elements of the piece to be able to work on to improve?
I definitely know that I need to work on paying attention to the smaller details. Obviously, being able to play it is really important, but now I know I'm at the stage where I can play it and I can learn the music, but I need to pay attention to the dynamics and the tempo and the articulation, and the phrases and how it's supposed to be played. And by looking at the standards, it tells me that, and it tells me what I need to know, and I just haven't gotten to the step of learning those things yet.
I definitely noticed that me being on stage, you kind of get lost on the stage and you don't really think about what's going on. You just kind of lose yourself in it, and it's a time where you can really be yourself and you don't have to worry about school at the time and grades and stress. It just all kind of goes away for a time, and it lets you relax and enjoy yourself, and then you can get back to worrying or stressing, but it's kind of like a medium to help with the stress and the anxiety of every day-to-day life in school. I'll say in terms of performance and stage fright, that has been my biggest challenge throughout all of high school when it came to music, is performance. I have such performance anxiety. And my freshman year, I knew I wanted to be in the All-State Honors Band by the time I graduated. And freshman year, I knew I probably didn't have the skill set to get in, but I made myself audition and get in front of those judges to just get that experience. And it was terrifying, and I messed up a bunch of times. I didn't get in. It was sad. But each year I got better and better. I did all the auditions even though I dreaded them, and I knew I might not get in. All the pressure was on, but I forced myself to do them. I was like, this is going to be good for me. And my senior year, I finally had reached the point. I'd been soloing on stage for the past 4 years in combo, did stuff that I knew was uncomfortable at the time but would be good for me. And senior year, I finally nailed the audition. I got in, and if I hadn't made myself be exposed to that fear and being on stage performing for people, I wouldn't be where I am today. And the progression has been worth it, even if it's terrifying at the time.
Do you think that will translate into other endeavors, even if you don't continue on with the musical aspect of things?
I've been more outspoken over the years due to just exposing myself to being in front of people, and it's helped me in many parts of life, yeah.
Because all of you guys are part of the arts, right? But think about the people that don't want to be part of the arts, right?
Right, they need their fine arts credit.
And need their fine arts credit, right? What do you guys think that it's important for them to interact with the arts in that way, where they're learning about it in a certain regard through doing it? And if so, why? Why do you think that's
I think everybody should at least expose themselves to something. Because I've talked to a lot of kids in the past few years, you know, they've gotten their fine arts credit from a film history course. And, you know, I say, you know, why didn't you join band? They're just like, well, I didn't really want to. I mean, or they'll say, well, I suck at instruments, but they've never tried. They should at least expose themselves and try painting, try art, try music, try chorus, try theater, things like that. And I think everybody should at least, expose themselves to at least some sort of portion of these settings.
I think the biggest hurdles, first of all, the biggest hurdle just in moving into performance-based education and what happens in the classroom is that we need to really educate the community, because the things that students do in school look very different in a student-centered classroom than they might have looked when we were in school. So when parents were in school, there was a whole lot of sit in a chair and the teacher is giving you all the information and you're soaking it up and memorizing it and spitting it back out. In a student-centered classroom where students are working on standards, it's really the responsibility is much more on the student to navigate their way. The instruction is more small group. Kids are moving around doing different things. The classroom might not be quiet or orderly looking, and students really have to take responsibility and do some of that learning on their own, which is a huge adjustment for kids when they're not used to it.
I think students have sort of a general idea about where we're headed with it, because I think we've talked quite a bit about it, and I think they're hearing it on the news, and they're hearing it in the classrooms, they're hearing it in their families. I don't know that it's always positive what they're hearing. I think it's depending on who is presenting what information on it. But I think students have a general idea that the standards-based education is based around selecting standards and then the content that fits within that particular standard. So I think students have a general idea about it. I think what students don't really know is like, how is this going to play out? Like, how am I going to be graded on that? And what are there still going to be timelines? So there are a lot of, I think, details that students we haven't involved in the conversation, which I think we need to, obviously. I do think that student voice is very important. I think that students have a lot to offer. One of the reasons I really enjoy my job is because I like learning from students, because I think students have, a man told me a long time ago, the mentor I was working with, he said he likes working with young people because they're more like pine trees or fir trees, and that they flex and they move within their environment. When it snows, they lay down and
they're not rigid. As adults grow older, they become more like oak trees, and they become more rigid. And one thing he liked about young people is the flexibility. And I always remember how, that conversation that we had about that, because that's the one thing I really enjoy, is that when I listen to a student about their perspective about an issue, I think they bring a freshness to and if you're open and you listen, it doesn't mean that they're always right or they're perfect, but they definitely can influence how you might want to make decisions, or how decisions you make might help them more. Because my experiences have been, most students want to be successful, most students want to move forward, most students want to have a positive experience. And so if we include them in the conversation and we allow them to sit at the table, I think they'll be more engaged in it, and they'll feel like that they are valued in this new system as we move forward.
I don't necessarily like a number grading system where it's kind of just a competition to get the highest number, whether or not you learn the material. It's more a motivation for the GPA, a motivation to get the A, whether or not you did learn the material. Whether standards based, you could actually, if you get a meets, you learn the material, or hopefully you learn the material. It'd just be a lot easier to tell between students, rather than, I have this GPA, that doesn't mean you know anything.
And in reference to weighted grades, I think we all know people who take study halls rather than unweighted classes, so their GPA doesn't get lowered.
Yeah.
Or gym classes.
Yeah.
Does that go back to the proficiency base? I mean, does that kind of go full circle now back to when we start talking about proficiency base as opposed to a number grade? Are you talking about what you actually know and what can you actually do, right?
Well, and I feel like right now, not just in our school, just in general, it's about the grade. I think that the majority of students don't care what they're learning or if they learn it, as long as their grade on that paper looks good. And I think it's sad, because that's not what the point of it should be. But grades are so important. Going to college is so important. All this stuff is so important for you to do well in, that people would rather do well if it meant cheating or just cramming the night before if it meant that they would get the better
Or
grade.
even taking an AP class and being like, I got a B, but it's an AP class.
But it's weighted.
So who cares? I can slack off.
I think people are forgetting why you're even in school. You're not in school to a competition for, who can get the highest number in their grade. You want to learn the material, I like coming to school because I enjoy learning material. I don't just come here to get, how high a grade I can get, but I want to learn some material.
Now, do you think that might diminish motivation to not have the competition? Do you think that motivation might start going away when there is not that competition?
You would hope that it wouldn't.
It probably, I bet it would.
I think it would. Moving to standards would definitely take out a lot of this competition, but it would be rewarding in that you met this standard, that you know this much material, versus when you have a bunch of kids that are just all trying to get the highest grades, all trying to get an A, trying to become valedictorian. They're not striving for education, they're striving for that competition. They all want to, I'm not saying everyone just wants to be better than everyone else, because that's not true, but I think moving to a standards-based learning, it would not be about getting the grades, but it would be about learning.
So have we created a system? I think the question goes back to proficiency based. Have we created a system that perpetuates these type of behaviors that happen externally to
The
us?
competitiveness is definitely still there.
I think if we shifted to a more standards-based grading system, the motivation would be put in a different area. You'd be motivated to learn the material and actually pass the courses, rather than to, just get the high grade, get the class rank, get the GPA.
It's going to be beneficial to us. I think to administrators, to faculty, many of us feel like a lot of the times we are not getting the student voice that we need to make the decisions that we need to make. So here, knowing that, first of all, we need to step up our game to make sure that we're getting that student voice, but also students need to step up their game to actually give that voice, is going to be important in the dialogue and moving forward with that.
I don't think kids take it seriously. I don't think that they think that saying anything will actually change anything. Like, it's almost like we might say something, it might be heard, they might take it into consideration, but really nothing changes. And so it's kind of to the point where they're like, well, what's the point of saying anything if nothing's actually happening?